But I have seen so many experts with 20 letters behind their name and so many more degrees than I have let their imposter syndrome keep them from getting their good messages out. And so I believe very strongly that if I have something to say that can help other people, then I just need to figure out how to get it out there. And it's not about me and my credentials or how smart I am. It's just about how do I deliver this message to the people that need to hear it.
How can we remain open to opportunity and serendipity, say yes when new doors open, and follow the career path that opens up in front of us as we move forward with enthusiasm and curiosity? Let's talk all about it and a lot more with Rosa Hart, the host of Nurse Rosa's Insights podcast and fellow member of the Health Podcast Network, right here on episode 492 of The Nurse Keith Show. Hey there, this is Nurse Keith. This podcast is about you. It's about your personal and professional development, your career, and the healthcare system writ large. And I'm here to share education, ideas, and informative interviews with some of the most inspiring people from the worlds of healthcare, nursing, entrepreneurship, medicine, and beyond. I love having you along for the ride, and I thank you from the bottom of my nurse podcaster's heart for being part of the growing Nurse Keith Nation. If you'd like to help other people find the show, my ubiquitous request is that you leave a rating and review, especially over on Apple Podcasts and also on Amazon or Spotify. And you become a patron at patreon.com, patreon.com/Nurse Keith. As little as $2 a month is a great help keeping the lights on and things rolling here at the Nurse Keith Show. That's patreon.com/Nurse Keith. And no matter how you're interacting with the show, thank you so much for being here and hanging out with us. The show notes are at nursekeith.com, but of course, you can also find the show notes and all the links we mention on any app where you happen to find yourself listening. And as I said today, we're here today with Rosa Hart. She's a host of the podcast Nurse Rosa's Insights, and she's a whole lot more than that. And Rosa, it's an honor and privilege to have you on the show. This is awesome. And like I said, we're fellow members of the Health Podcast Network. I love your show. You've had some great people on, including Jean Ross, who I've had on the show not that long ago. And you've had an interesting career and very varied, and we'll get into that. So my first question is kind of a big overarching one, which is, what is your secret sauce, your secret ingredient when it comes to being open to rolling with the punches in life and just like embracing opportunity? Like, what is it about you that makes you able to do that?
Well, thank you, Keith. And I really appreciate you inviting me to join you here today on your podcast. And like 5 years ago, I wouldn't have known what a podcast was, let alone thought I was going to say yes to an opportunity to have my own. And so I wouldn't even have it identified as a person who necessarily said yes to a lot of opportunities. So I've experienced a lot of changes in the last 5 years or so that have kind of led to this journey. Because you said, what is it about me? And I started as a nurse in the ICU, and I grew up as more of a perfectionist and rule follower, and I wanted to do everything the right way, no matter if it made me happy or not, because I wanted to do what was right, and I still do. But I feel like when I worked in the ICU for 8 years, it kind of broke me of that perfectionism that I had more naturally growing up. And as I walked with people through the hardest days of their lives and got to be there with people who were experiencing their last moments, some with integrity, having lived a life where they were like, I've had a good life, I'm ready to go. And then others who were not, it really made me contemplate my own mortality. And if it was my turn, how would I feel I had lived? As in, I wanted to make sure I got a chance to live before I die. And so I started saying yes to more opportunities after that.
That's great. And so it's like you've kind of learned by doing and learned
Mm-hmm.
by rolling with the punches and realizing that you had to embrace stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
what I found really interesting when you and I spoke, like a month ago or so,
Mm-hmm.
um, you have a bachelor's degree in singing opera. So
Yeah.
was that like right out of the gate after high school? Did you go to
Mm-hmm.
music school? Was that your
Mm-hmm.
dream?
Yeah, yeah. So I wanted to be a ballerina for about 5 minutes, but I couldn't get
Mm.
dance lessons. But my mom was a singer, and so she gave me voice lessons for as far back as I can remember. And she has a degree in singing as well. And so she prepared me, and I got a music scholarship. So I got my first bachelor's degree on a music scholarship in voice. And I always pictured myself as a performer. I say the stage is like my natural habitat.
Mm.
Like my first solo was in front of like 300 people when I was 4.
Wow.
So that was something I always just really enjoyed as far as being a part of something bigger than myself. But this will be funny to anybody who knows me now as a social media influencer. But I actually kind of gave up on the idea of going into music as a career because I felt like I wasn't pretty enough to be a famous musician or successfully like making money at it. So the irony is thick there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, you, so that those beliefs about yourself held you back, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you
Yeah.
changed course because of those beliefs about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure a lot of people felt and knew that those beliefs were erroneous, that, but you had to do what was right for you. And you were in your 20s at the time, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I got my first bachelor's degree. I graduated when I was 21.
Yeah.
So,
So why did nursing pop up into your consciousness? Like what caused you to be like, oh, healthcare and nursing and caring for
mhm.
people from music? Like what was the jump?
Yeah. So my the summer between my junior and senior year, I was pregnant with my son, and I actually took anatomy and physiology for fun. I
All
took
right.
it as an elective because I wanted to learn more about my body and my baby's body, so I could be a good mom and understand how our bodies worked. And I was getting better grades than the other students in the class who were all pre-nursing students. Apparently nobody else takes A&P for fun.
I
So
guess not.
yeah. And I was like, oh, well, maybe I should be a nurse. And in the course of my pregnancy and getting to know, my doctors and nurses and like learning about it in real time application, I kind of just developed more of an affinity for it and wanted to go into. First thought about becoming a physician assistant, and we were going to move to Louisville, Kentucky, which is where I live now. And they didn't have a program here; they had a nursing program, so I decided to go to nursing school instead here.
And all the better for the world that you became a nurse. Um,
Sure,
yeah. So
I love
you,
my PA friends though. Shout out to
oh,
them.
of course, no, PAs fulfill a very important role. And,
Yeah.
nurse practitioners are also in a similar type of world. And there's
Hmm.
a lot of holes in the healthcare system that need to be filled, especially
Yeah.
primary care. And I think
Hmm.
PAs and NPs do a lot of that filling in where the healthcare system has fallen on its face. And so,
Although, if you need some to do some brain surgery, there are some PAs and nurse practitioners I would want to have for first shot at it too. So,
yeah,
um,
I'll say,
yeah,
yeah,
the
for sure.
neurosciences can get really interesting.
They can. Now, in terms of nursing, what caught your eye? Because I know you were an ICU nurse's aide before you
Hmm.
became a nurse,
Right.
and you were also a nurse navigator. So, did the navigation come before or after ICU?
I started in the ICU after, so I waited tables first, and then once I got into nursing school, because I had to wait a year and get residency in Kentucky in order to not, pay twice as much in tuition. Um, I got a job as a nurse's aide my first semester of nursing school to just kind of get my foot in the door in a hospital, kind of get some hands-on experience that wasn't just, book learning. And
Mhm.
I was hired into a neuro ICU unit. And so I didn't know the difference between different specialties. That was all new to me. And I actually got to float between neuro, cardiac, and oncology, as well as surgical ICU. So I got to see the different flavors and meet the different crews and their own group dynamics. And so that was really interesting to get to kind of walk in and out of.
Yeah. And what great experience to have as a nursing student, to
Mm-hmm.
be floating to these different units and really like being in the belly of the beast, so to speak, and seeing it in real life right up in front of
Mm-hmm.
you. And then also doing your clinicals during nursing school. So you got quite an
Mm-hmm.
education, professionally and educationally. Um, when
Yeah.
did nurse navigation come into your focus? And did you navigate in the intensive care kind of space?
No, that's pretty separate. So I did 8 years in the ICU, and then that was all acute care. And I did shadow our case manager one day to kind of get an idea of what their job was like. But that wasn't something I necessarily, I didn't get a clear picture of kind of where I saw my career heading um, until I was invited to go to a stroke survivor dinner because the Norton Neuroscience Institute Resource Center put on an annual stroke survivor dinner. And one of my patients who had received the clot busting medication as well as mechanical thrombectomy, um, he and I got to establish a very close relationship very quickly because I had to hold pressure on his groin for probably an hour.
Oh my
And
gosh.
he was wanting to get up and run away. And I had to kind of calm him down and talk him through it. And they wouldn't give him any medication for calming him because we wanted to optimize his mental status, right? And through that interaction, where he and his wife and I got to know each other real well, he remembered me. And so a year later, he was like, I'll come to this dinner, but only if Rosa's going to be there. And
Oh,
so
wow. How
I
nice.
got to see him again, and he apologized for being, um, you know, a lot to handle. But I was very glad to see that he got his life back. And that treatment really worked. Like the other half of his body was now working. And so just getting to see that end result of all those hard shifts, was so transformative for me. And the contact person who relayed that he wanted to see me again was the stroke navigator. And so I got to see kind of a glimpse of, oh, her job is she gets to talk to the people who get better. Here I am holding their hands as they pass away or saying goodbye as they downgrade out of ICU, but they're still kind of
Hmm.
sick. But she gets to see these success stories all the time. So I was like, I want that job where
Mm.
I can get more of a positive recovery interaction. And so when her job came available, I was like, as soon as this person scoops over out of this chair, I'm going to apply for that job.
Wow. And what was your title?
Now, as the
In
stroke
no,
navigator,
in that job. That was stroke nurse navigator. Is that the
I'm
official
still in
title?
that job. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm the stroke nurse navigator for the Norton Healthcare System. We have 8 adult hospitals, and I don't navigate with the children that have strokes. That's a
Hmm.
separate area.
Hmm.
But I call the ones that go home after having a stroke and talk to them about their risk factors to prevent having a stroke again, and then also identify barriers and things like financial transportation issues that might be keeping them from getting the care they need and connect them to those resources in the community as well.
Wow. So yeah, having this next conversation with you after you and I first spoke last month, I'm
Mm-hmm.
seeing how you you do have this tendency to be curious and
Mhm.
say yes. Like you were like, oh, that woman's job looks kind of cool. I want to have
Yeah.
that job. And then, you know, and then he invited you to the stroke, the dinner, and
Mhm.
things have come along that you've embraced. Like you got pregnant
Mhm.
and you
Mhm.
wanted to learn about your body and your baby's body, so you took anatomy and physiology.
That's
So
true.
I see this in you. There's this pattern in your story, in your bio, about how you continue to embrace, like, what's next, what's next, what's next, and you're open. And I also understand that you do have a podcast now, and we'll talk about Nurse Rosa's insights, but you created an award-winning podcast called Stronger After Stroke. And that was
Yeah.
for the Norton Neuroscience Institute. So
Mhm.
where did that opportunity come from? Because it seems like opportunities come to you left and right.
Well, when you say yes to things, I guess people notice that, oh, she might say yes to that. I'll ask her, right? Um, well, that kind of came unpredictably, I would have thought as well. Thank you for um, serving me with that reflection because I hadn't considered my own openness like as far back as taking A&P for fun. So I appreciate your outside perspective there. So I got into podcasting because I was humoring a friend who wanted to start a podcast where we reviewed local restaurants. And then we started interviewing local business owners and nonprofit leaders about what they do that makes Louisville, Kentucky a great place to be. And because I built these relationships with the community and was consistently putting out this podcast locally, the leadership at Norton Healthcare reached out to me when they were considering doing some kind of podcast for the Norton Neuroscience Institute. And they're like, you already do a podcast. Would you like to do one about stroke? And I was like, yes, 100%. And so they said, well, take some time, think about what topics you'd want to cover and who you might want to interview. So 2 hours later, I had 2 pages worth of titles and or subjects and who I would want to interview because we have 120 or so neuro specialists within the Neuroscience Institute, and then also all these interdisciplinary team members who specialize in stroke rehab and things like that, from anything from music therapy to pelvic floor therapy. I mean, it's such a good variety, right? And I usually would be connecting people with these resources on a one-to-one connection. So the idea of being able to take all of these amazing resources and kind of encapsulate in 20 minutes of gold for each topic where somebody can listen to it and get these answers to frequently asked questions or learn about a therapy they didn't even know existed before that could improve their life seemed like a great opportunity to me. So I was very thankful that they invited me to do that.
That's great. And that was a limited series podcast, right? But is it ongoing?
Mhm. We
Oh, it
put
is
out
ongoing.
we put out a new episode every month. We're on
Oh,
episode 23. This month's episode will be on memory and stroke. And it's been heard in 67 countries
all
and
right.
all over the world. It won first place at the International Stroke Conference for the American Heart Association in February,
Congratulations.
and it's being prescribed by providers all over the country, in different countries even. There's a physical therapist in Ireland who shares it with all his patients because he said it's really encouraging for them. We have stroke survivor stories that are shared. And so I'm really thankful they're able to continue to benefit from that. But
Well, that's
yes, I have more
fantastic.
content coming every month.
Oh gosh, my mistake. So
No, that's
Stronger
okay.
After Stroke. So people
Hmm.
should look that up and share it with their patients and their colleagues. So that's Stronger
Hmm.
After Stroke with the Norton Neuroscience Institute, NNI. So
Hmm.
that's
Hmm.
great. So in the
Yes.
second half, we're going to talk about Nurse Rosa's Insights, your other podcast. But your podcasting journey started with a foodie podcast that you mentioned about Louisville, which is
Hmm.
really awesome. And that one is still ongoing as well, right?
Yep.
And
Hmm.
where can people find that one? Is that also
Hmm.
everywhere?
Yeah. So both podcasts are available on all the audio platforms and on YouTube, at least the audio version. For the Lou review, I have like just a cover photo that has the audio available, though.
That's great. So we'll make sure those are in the show notes.
Well, thank
So
you.
along the way, so you had a child, you went to nursing school, you have had, well, 3 podcasts actually. So I appreciate that. And you've also been invited to speak at conferences, publish in a journal, so all these other opportunities, did these also kind of fall in your lap because people noticed you and you were, I mean, like you said, when you're the type of person who says yes, people will often ask you to do the next thing. So speaking at conferences and all that, did that also just kind of serendipitously begin to happen?
Well, I don't want to say any of it fell in my lap because it was a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I forgot to mention, I did have a second child as well. So I've got
Oh,
2 kids
okay.
at home and a husband and a dog and my full-time job as a stroke navigator, right? So then I've got the podcast, the Lure Review that I do locally, the podcast for Stronger After Stroke, which is in addition to phone calls. And the conference speaking opportunities and getting published in the journal, I had to do a lot of writing for that. And I had to submit abstracts and get tutored on how to formulate these things. Because a lot of what I do is more, I don't know, organic and conversational. And so I've been very blessed to have mentorship from other nurses who have been very supportive in this is how you design an academic poster. And even this is how you submit an abstract to teach a CE course, or this is how you write a letter to the editor for the Journal of Neuroscience Nursing. And
Mm-hmm.
so I definitely received a lot of mentorship, but I would say it definitely was uncomfortable because there's a lot of that imposter syndrome of, well, am I really smart enough to do this? Why do I need to be the one to do this? But I have seen so many experts with 20 letters behind their name and so many more degrees than I have let their imposter syndrome keep them from getting their good messages out. And so
Mm-hmm.
I believe very strongly that if I have something to say that can help other people, then I just need to figure out how to get it out there. And it's not about me and my credentials or how smart I am. It's just about how do I deliver this message to the people that need to hear it.
That is a great message for people who are listening right now. So it's not worrying about what people think. It's not worrying about how many letters are after your name exactly. So like I have a bachelor's degree, right? And a lot of people out on the speaking circuit have masters and PhDs and DNPs and that sort of thing. And I could say to myself, well, you know, who am I as a nurse with a BSN to think I can have a podcast and I can speak on stage and I can write articles and do all these things? But it is sort of the ability or the willingness to
Mm-hmm.
just do it anyway and
Mm-hmm.
accept the fact that you have something to say and something to share and that it has value.
Mm-hmm.
So when we come back from the break, I'd like to talk more about that. And then I want to talk specifically about Nurse Rosa's insights and what you are doing with that amazing podcast. So hang in there with us. We'll be right back for the second half of episode 492 of the Nurse Keith Show. And we are here with Rosa Hart, the host of the Nurse Rosa's Insights podcast. Are you looking for a fascinating and novel way to empower and elevate your career? My wife, Shada McKenzie, is a gifted traditional astrologer and reader of the tarot with clients around the world, and she offers my listeners a 10% discount on their first consultation. Shada's approach to astrology emphasizes the integration of both modern and traditional techniques as they've been practiced for over 2,000 years, and she brings her sensitivity, life experience, and wisdom to every consult. Shada's work can reveal deep-seated patterns and unlock your potential to live a more meaningful personal and professional life. I and many of my clients have benefited greatly from Shada's mastery of these ancient tools, and if astrology is aligned with your personal belief system, I encourage you to consider reaching out to her at thecircleandthedot.com or email her at Shada, S-H-A-D-A, at thecircleandthedot.com. Remember to mention the Nurse Keith Show for 10% off your first consultation, and thank you. And welcome back to the second half of the episode. We're here again with friend of the pod and my new friend and colleague, Rosa Hart of Nurse Rosa's Insights. And Rosa, prior to the break, you were just saying something about imposter syndrome and how we were both sharing how, knowing that you have something to say, and whether you have a bachelor's degree, an associate's degree, a DNP, it doesn't really matter. If you feel moved to share and you're willing to put yourself out there in the world, and there's risk involved in doing that, of course, because there might be people who disagree with you or who don't believe you should be doing what you're doing. But understanding that you have something to say and then being willing to just say it and know that there's value there. So for someone listening who feels like maybe they do have something to say, like whether it's speaking at a conference or having a podcast or maybe just writing a blog, like whatever it is, what do you say to someone like that who feels that they're not good enough, they don't have the credentials, they don't have the authority, quote unquote, to do so? What's your first admonition to them to say, you can do it?
So I think of it in kind of the same ways that I think about if I'm worried about what I'm going to wear, because it was helpful for me to also think other people are not as worried about how I look as they are about themselves. Everybody's thinking about themselves. They're not so much worried about whatever is going on with you. And so that has helped me throughout my life with stage fright, like in real life. And so when it comes to messaging, public speaking, putting out messages on TV or on putting myself out there on social media, putting myself into the thought process of what does my audience need to hear? What do they need to see? What will make them feel better in some way has really taken a lot of the fear out of it, because I'm not so much worried about what they think of me so much as are they going to receive the message that I'm going to share? And, is this an important message to share? Different messages have different levels of importance. But like one thing I'm really pushing is the be fast, the knowing the signs of stroke to recognize and when to call 911. B is for balance. E is for eyes, a sudden change in vision. F is for face, like a facial droop on one side. A is for arms, where one arm is weaker than the other. S is for speech, like slurred speech. And T is for time, where time saved is brain saved. So if you see any of these changes, call 911. And that message is so important that if I'm having a bad hair day, okay. But if my bad hair day video could help somebody learn a life-saving bit of information that could keep them from having to be in a worst case scenario that I've seen more than enough of, then that's worth it, right? And so, as you were saying, if people feel like they have something to say, there's a lot of nurses who have a lot of really good things to say. And the thing is, if you can educate your patient at the bedside about something, then you have all the authority and knowledge you need to put that out on a more public platform, be that an interview in a written form of media. I know Nurse Rachel Malloy has her course, Nurses in the Media, where she teaches you how to like formulate your message and make sure that's ready, and so that you can feel more prepared and help with some of that imposter syndrome as well. But on the inside, I think it's important for nurses for us to not feel like we're in some kind of competition with other nurses or providers or professionals to see who has the most letters behind our name in order to be believed, because people really don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, as John Maxwell says.
Say that one more time.
People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
That's a good one. I've never heard that one. I like
Oh, really?
that. Yeah. That's a
well,
really
then
good
I'm glad
one.
to share that with you, because, that's always in the back of my head.
People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. That's a really good thing to carry with ourselves. That's a great one. I appreciate that. Now, this is a very empowering message for nurses that you're sharing, and I appreciate it. And your story is very much about self-empowerment, recognizing what your strengths are, embracing your strengths. So before we get to Nurse Rosa's insights, which I want to jump to in a couple minutes, I want to talk about Power Up Nursing.
Oh, sure.
And that is also part of your bio and part of your story. And Power Up Nursing is new to me. So I'd love for you to explain what it is and tell our audience about it and why this organization is so important.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So Power Up Nursing is a startup, came to exist in 2021. It was the brainchild of Leanne Meyer, who is another nurse podcaster.
Oh, yeah, I know Leanne.
Yeah. And she had the Once a Nurse podcast, and she was talking with her friend, Tanya Abreu, about the need to empower nurses, and that the only way to transform healthcare is for nurses to lead it and to be empowered. We don't need nurses who are, tired of the way things are, just leaving the profession entirely. They need to be empowered to make it better and make the world a healthier place. And so they partnered with Dr. Alba Rodriguez and her husband, Dr. Ramon Nunez, and formed the Power Up Nursing, the company. And so that goal is to empower nurses, and it's kind of a two-pronged approach. We've got events, like I'm helping host our national symposium soon here in October. Actually, I think it will happen before this episode airs. And so we will be featuring speakers who will teach nurses about how to use their voice. The theme of the symposium is voice and vitality. So how do we use our voice to get our messaging out there? How do we build our own brand as nurses to show that we are professionals, but also not just that nurses care, but that we are educated and knowledgeable professionals who can elevate the level of community health awareness. Also empower nurses to have better wellness and vitality themselves physically. Like, how do we physically prioritize ourselves and take care of ourselves? Like, what are some practical self-care strategies other than go take a salt bath or whatever?
Right.
So
Exactly.
a lot more extensive than that, as well as, what other career opportunities might there be for someone who is in nursing that's not just working at the bedside, because only, for example, in Kentucky, 47% of the nurses in Kentucky work at the bedside. So over half work at not the bedside. So what are those options?
Yeah. What are they doing anyway? Right.
Right. And so some are in health tech. And so we'll have someone teach us what do all nurses need to understand about AI. It's a hot topic, but not necessarily something nurses get to discuss very often. So hosting some of those really exciting conversations. I was on Leanne's podcast, and that's how I initially met her and made contact with the organization. And then they invited me to speak on the Power Up Nursing Cruise in April. So that was my first international speaking experience.
Awesome.
And I was very nervous about that, but it was really great. And afterwards, they were like, we all want to have our own podcast now because we all have different things that we have messages about. And when I was able to encourage them to use their voice, it really ignited something in me that's kind of the message that I want to share now, is to empower other nurses that their knowledge is valuable and they should have the boldness to share it. So the other side of Power Up Nursing is going to be presented at the health conference in Las Vegas, which will also have been concluded by the time this episode airs. Yeah. But Power Up Nursing is up for one of the digital health awards at Health, and that is for the hospital program. Power Up Nursing has partnered with a pilot program at Jackson Health in Miami, and they've done a trial of a 6-week program using somatic functional therapy and some of the vitality rings. I think they use the Samsung Galaxy rings for the pilot, but we've also been talking with Ultrahuman about using their biometric measuring rings to look at sleep, because sleep is such an integral part of our health and our mental health especially. And so we're looking at the results from that pilot project there to see if we're going to share a white paper as well that will demonstrate the use of that program at hospitals, and we'll be able to share that with hospitals from around the country, because there'll be like 2,500 different hospitals represented there at least.
Wow. What a dynamic organization and everything
huge.
They have going on. It's enormous. I need to tune into that a little bit more and maybe have Leanne on to talk about Power Up Nursing.
Yeah, or Tanya, because Tanya's really our chief strategy officer and the one who's really like boots on the ground making it happen.
That's great. Okay, so I'm going to follow up with that. Okay, so Nurse Rosa's Insights is a podcast that's along with mine on the Health Podcast Network, which is really exciting. And by the time this airs, you'll have been at the health conference with Dan Kendall of Health Podcast Network and with other HPN podcast hosts. I unfortunately was not able to be there. But Nurse Rosa's Insights, what's the mission of the show? And I've listened to several episodes already, but tell me a little bit about the show.
Thanks. So Nurse Rosa's Insights is kind of an organic outgrowth of the work that I did with the Stronger After Stroke podcast. I've had so many people who are really passionate about making healthcare better reach out to me after the Stronger After Stroke podcast became well known. And they're like, I want to be on your podcast and talk about this. And my response is, that sounds like a great idea, but it has nothing to do with stroke. So, so basically I had to create a whole new platform to host these conversations and amplify these great ideas that I keep hearing from innovators and people who are really working hard to make healthcare better, or they have really big ideas that I think could make a huge practical difference, but maybe they don't have the funding to make it happen and they don't know how to go about finding that. And I'm not necessarily a fundraiser, but my idea was, after listening to Shauna Butler's series on See You Now, she was talking about healthcare philanthropy and how only 1% of the healthcare philanthropy dollars go towards supporting nursing in some capacity. And that's about $1 billion. And one of the takeaways from that is we could do a whole lot of, support to double that and get $1 more billion, but there's a limit to how much that can do. And it would need to be used really strategically to have the biggest impact that would be sustainable. So we need to develop ideas to best utilize any philanthropy that we can get. And so that kind of got my wheels turning as to, okay, how do we get people to narrow down on their ideas of how to make the biggest impact in a strategically focused way? So that's the question I asked to each one of my guests. And they come from all different backgrounds. Some are nurses, some are physicians, and some are their stake in healthcare may be not because they work in it, but because they're a human person who has health needs, right? But they may see needs that, if they are met efficiently, could be transformative if done on like a broader scale. And who better to invest in something like that than maybe somebody who wants to donate $1 billion, but doesn't necessarily want to go through 1 million applications to find the most effective way to distribute it. So the goal of the Nurse Rosa's Insights podcast is to give those people a platform to share their ideas about how to make us all healthier.
That's wonderful. And it's great. And like I said earlier, Jean Ross of Primary Record has been on the show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
She had a great, we had a great interview on the Nurse Keith show, not that many episodes ago. She's wonderful. And I think she's doing some great work over at Primary Record. And you've had some other great guests. I was listening to a couple episodes this morning. So, your show is relatively fresh out of the gate, right? And you're growing it, and you're part of the Health Podcast Network very quickly as you're out of the gate, which I think is smart.
Yeah.
And, Dan Kendall is amazing. And he's actually going to be my guest on my 500th episode. And he's going to help me reflect on my journey on episode 500. And maybe he'll kind of interview me to some extent. And we'll talk about the power of podcasting and the network and all that. So I'm at that end of, not the end, but I'm at that point in the podcasting journey, at 500 episodes, sort of like looking back and figuring out where I've been and what I've done.
Right. And sometimes you need that outside perspective to just kind of give you that feedback and to see parts of your own life you didn't see that way before, like you did for me earlier.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And then figuring out what's next, like part of our journeys all along are figuring out like, okay, so now what? And you've asked yourself that question many times, I think, like, okay, now what? Like, as this next thing comes along. So we all have those points in our lives. I'm at one of those with this show, actually, is like, okay, what do I do with the Nurse Keith show now? So I appreciate witnessing and hearing about all the ways in which you've embraced change and embraced the things that have come along, serendipitously or otherwise, and opportunities you've created and formulated for yourself. So I think your journey has a lot to teach people. So I really appreciate that. And before we go, I have 4 questions I ask all my guests. They're not really related to what we've been talking about, but they are in a sense because it's about you. And this episode is all about you. So the first question I like to ask everybody is, how do you define success personally and professionally? What does it mean?
So success would be obviously the opposite of failure, and I don't mean to be morbid again, but because I have had so much experience with people at the end of their lives and seeing the impact that their lives had on other people. There were some people I was the one holding their hand because they didn't have anybody in their life who wanted to be with them in those last days and moments. And I think for me, at the end of my life, I would see success as being surrounded by people who loved me, who I had made a positive impact in their life, so that if it were me lying in the bed, they would all be able to go around and share why their life was better because I was in it. And I remember specifically certain people, patients that I had who, they had friends and family or friends who were closer than family. And I'll never forget those people because of the stories that their friends and family shared about how impactful they were. And so that would definitely be my definition of success.
Wow. I noticed you didn't mention how much money you earned. You didn't mention how many letters were after your name.
Right. And those friends and family, they don't know any of those letters that are after your name. No. Or if they know them, they don't know what they mean.
They don't care.
They do not care.
they care that you care. So yeah, I appreciate that a lot. Okay. The second question I have for you is, could you name, I know it's hard sometimes just to think of one person, but could you name someone who's been a great inspiration to you in the course of your life? Like one of those touchstones for you. They can be living or dead, can be a very famous person who you admire, or it could be someone from your personal life who has just been one of those, one of those people in your life that's just really helped guide you along the way.
I I said earlier, I have had so many great people who have mentored me, and I would want to give you a big long list. Currently, when I get up in the morning and get dressed and decide how to present myself in the world, I think of my current boss, Yvette Cabrera Rojas. She founded the Norton Neuroscience Resource Center where I work. She's my direct supervisor, but she's also definitely one of my best mentors. She has believed in me more than I knew to believe in myself. And she'll correct me when I need to be corrected. And I know it's from a place of she wants me to be more successful and impactful than I can even imagine. And so if she's telling me I need to do something differently, I believe her. And I kind of want to be like her when I grow up. So yeah, it's definitely right now. She's like my work mom. So
that's lovely. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, third question. Is there a book, a movie, anything from the wider culture, and it doesn't have to be your absolute favorite, but one that pops into your mind that has had an impact on the way you think, the way you live your life, the way you approach your work, your relationships, your parenting, anything, like just something that is just one of those really important things out there in the world that you keep going back to?
Well, I've read a lot of books and I've watched a lot of movies, and I do like to put a lot of them together. I think something that really had an impact on me was at one point I was consistently reading the devotional, My Utmost for His Highest, which is a Christian devotional. And there was one day that really stood out to me, and it was saying, we see what is wrong with other people because it is present in us. And that was very humbling. And I really internalized that message, which led to some self-deprecation. And like, oh my goodness, am I capable of that? But you've heard the expression probably there, but for the grace of God, go we all.
Yeah.
And so I think that having that perspective, especially from my more conservative, more self-righteous upbringing that I came from, I needed that humble reframing of learning about other people from a place of I'm not superior to anyone else, and just kind of leveling the playing field, if you will. And if I see something that I see as wrong, just recognizing, we're all capable of things depending on our circumstances.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for that reflection. All right. Last question. If you, Rosa Hart, were named Queen of the World tomorrow, just saying, what's one of the first things you'd want to do to improve the lives of your subjects, bearing in mind that you would eventually be able to do everything because you were Queen of the World? But right out of the gate, what would you want to do? Like when you waved your magic scepter, what would you do to change your subjects' lives?
Man, you'd think I'd have. That's different than the $1 billion question, because at least they have, time to implement it.
Yeah.
I like this though. Let's see. Nobody would be hungry anymore.
It's a good place to start.
I mean, who can be their best self when they're hungry? Nobody. So I think I'd start there, and then we can eliminate a whole lot of problems.
That's a good one. Yeah. Several other guests have mentioned hunger. Some have mentioned universal health care. There's themes around like meeting basic needs, because what can people accomplish if they don't have a housing, they don't have food, they don't have shelter, they don't have education, they don't have healthcare. So a lot of guests go in that direction of like, they need to have these basic needs met. So hunger, what can you accomplish when you're well fed and all the effects of being nutritionally sound? Gosh, we could go on and on about that for an hour.
That might solve a whole lot of problems.
Could solve a whole problems. That's true. So, Rosa, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been wonderful. I want people to check out nurserosaspeaks.com. That's your main clearinghouse, the website. You're on Instagram as Nurse Rosa Speaks, as well as Twitter and TikTok. And your Rosa Hart, SCRN on LinkedIn. We'll have all the links there. And then there's the Lou Review podcast, which people can check out on all the podcasting apps and YouTube if you want to learn about Louisville, Kentucky. And then there's also Power Up Nursing. Plenty for people to check out. So thank you for being here. Thanks for all the wonderful work you do in the world. You're an amazing person. I'm so glad we're connected. And thanks for gracing the airwaves here with me today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Keith. It's been a pleasure.
Well, there you have it. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Nurse Keith Show. Remember, the show notes are at nursekeith.com. They're also on the app where you happen to be listening. Please go to nurserosaspeaks.com. Check out the podcasts, check out everything that she's doing. Rosa is an amazing person, as you already know, and there's plenty to learn about her along the way. If you need personalized holistic career coaching to elevate your nursing career, please check out nursekeith.com. Remember, you get a 10% discount on your first coaching package if you mention The Nurse Keith Show. And if you can become a patron at patreon.com/Nurse Keith, I'd greatly appreciate it. We are proud members, just like Rosa is, of the Health Podcast Network with Dan Kendall, our amazing CEO and leader. And you can find them at healthpodcastnetwork.com. And we are adroitly produced by the inimitable Rob Johnston of 520R Podcasting. Before we say goodbye, I'll leave you with this quote by the musician Robert Fripp. May my living honor my parents. May my living repay the debt of my existence. Be well, dig deep, seek joy, keep in touch. This is Nurse Keith saying adios till next time from beautiful Santa Fe, New Mexico, and the wonderful Rosa Hart saying arrivederci from
Louisville, Kentucky.
All right. Thank you, Rosa. Thanks to everyone for listening, and we will catch you on the proverbial flip side.